What's up, guys? So in this video, it's just going to be a quick explanation of how I did the cab mounts. That seems to be the most commonly asked question I get for this project, is how I mounted the 67 onto the 02 Duramax chassis. Alright, so this thing started as a 1967 C10, and then I put it on top of a 2002 Duramax chassis. It started out as a crew cab short box chassis. I shortened it. I took 26 inches out of the middle of it to get it to line up with this wheelbase. And then the front axle is out of a Ford. It's a Super Duty axle using WFO's kit. I switched it over from the IFS because when I rolled the pickup, I really screwed up the IFS to the point where it just wasn't worth trying to fix. I was within $1,000 of this swap with part estimates, so went ahead with that. But anyways, when most people do this swap, they just take the box and they set it on the back and then just line the cab up with the body lines. And that seems logical, right? Well, when you do that, you end up with a huge gap between the frame and the bottom of the rocker panel. On mine, the box is lowered 5 inches from just setting it on there to get it to hide the frame nicely. And now to do that, I came in notched the rear box supports so that those sit down over top of the frame. And normally this wouldn't clear, but I took out the spare tire cross member and replaced it with some square tubing instead. But anyways, that's how I did the rear. Now if I was going to do it all over again, probably would have done the rear the same way I ended up doing the fronts, which so this is the box support here from the factory on the 67 stuff. And what I did is I actually notched it all the way across to clear, because there's cross members and fuel tank in the way that it's got to clear. So it's just easier to notch the whole thing. And then I just welded in a piece of 1 inch by 2 inch square tubing. And I did that for, I think, the front 2 cross members. And then the very front one sits down in the dip of the frame, so it's not a big deal. But then for cab mounts, I reused the 2002 mounts on the frame side, as well as the body mounts here, the hockey pucks or whatever you want to call them. So what I did, I moved these because they were about a foot farther forward and quite a bit higher on the frame. So I brought them down and tied them into this plate that I welded in to the main cab support structure underneath the cab, so it should be good and strong. So this is the front cab mount. If you come to the back, you can see there, it doesn't look like there is one. Well, that's because hang on here, I moved the cab mounts to the inside of the frame, and that's basically so that they line up with the original mounts on the 67 cab. Now on the front, I had to make my own because otherwise the original mounts line up straight with the frame, and with how low I got it sitting on the frame, it just wouldn't have worked using the original mounting location on the 67 cab. But the rear ones do. Now, on the factory, the 67, the bolts go in from the bottom, and I got cross member clearance issues for that. So I just cut the folded in nut off the top, and yeah, we did this instead, went in from the top with the bolts. So that's the cab mounts. And then last is the core support. So with the core support, again, the factory mounts were too high, so I made my own, brought them down a little bit. The factory one's actually curved up and over, And then a lot of people seem to manage to get the original Duramax core support to work. It wasn't an option for me, one, because it was bent, and two, it just would have sat too high with the way I have everything lowered down. So I ended up making my own. In the bottom, it's all 1 by 2 square inch tubing, and it comes in, dips down, and goes across to get the radiator and the intercooler lower. And then pop the hood. Come up, so here's the 1-inch tubing that comes from the bottom up, and that just bolts into the 67 style core, or the 67 core support. And the 67 core support I had to modify. The bottom of it was all rusted off, so I cut it off about just below the headlight area, and I reused as much of the 67 core support as I could, because it just makes mounting the fenders a lot easier. Headlight mounts, I don't have to redo anything for them. So we did that. I had to widen. I cut it all the way out to here, and then this is actually a piece of sheet metal bent around to cover the radiator end tanks. So yeah, we ended up widening this up. I cut a big chunk out of it because it was just too little squares to fit a tiny radiator, the tiny factory radiator. So, and then I Frenched in. This is a piece of 1-inch by 2-inch square tubing that's ran across the top here to add some more support to it. And just welded tabs on for the cooling stack. The bottom of the cooling stack actually mounts the same way it did into the factory core support. I just drilled a couple little holes, and the little rubber mounts the little rubber, I guess I don't know what we want to call them, isolators, so you go in there, and then the pegs off the cooling stack just sit down in there, and the top bolts in. So yeah, and then another thing, even though I got it mounted as low as I could onto the chassis without having to do major floor modifications, you can see I put a plastic air dam on the bottom. Now, ideally I wouldn't have had to do that. It's not my favorite look. I don't think it looks terrible, but I don't really think it looks great either. But I did that to cover up. You could still see the frame horns stuck down about 1.5 to 2 inches or so below the bumper yet. So this is just a nice simple way to do that. In the future I might address it. There is some room. I can probably cut 1 inch off the bottom of the frame horns and plate it, but you'd still see some of the frame horns. I don't know where I'm going to go with that yet. But for now, this is what I'm going to do until I get other things worked out, get it driving and everything and whatnot. So yeah, that's basically how I got this body sitting on here. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this answers some questions you guys had about doing this chassis swap. If there's anything else you want to know, please leave a comment. I'll see if I can explain it better, or even maybe make another video in the future that addresses any of the concerns you may have. Thanks, guys.